Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much for everyone joining us today. And welcome to the webinar, Is Your Attack Surface Fort Knox or Fort Never Locked? This is a fantastic opportunity to give you an insight into the world of threat and vulnerabilities and introduce attack surface management and the context of what attack surface management is. Today, I'm going to be joined by two speakers. I'm going to be joined by Owen Evans from Watchtower, who's the Vice President of Watchtower. And he'll give you an overview later on today as who Watchtower are and the capabilities they bring to the Echo portfolio. And I'm also joined by Paul Hogan, who's the Director of MDR from within Echo. In terms of housekeeping, we will share the slides and the presentation deck after this call to everyone that has enrolled. And as we go through the session and as we go through the presentation, you will see some interactive polls where we sort of ask for audience participation in and around some of the topics. And likewise, there is an opportunity to ask any specific questions as we go along. So we'll be hosting a Q&A session at the end, and we have had 3 or 4 questions sent in advance. So hopefully we should have some lively discussions in and around the Q&A. But moving on to the agenda. Really, there's 4 key topics that we'll be covering today. The threat and vulnerability landscape and what we're seeing out there across some of our customers and across some of our verticals and industries. We'll briefly introduce some of the terms of what the acronym Attack Surface Management is, or ASM, and the business problem that resolves. We'll introduce Owen and a team from Watchtower in and around why we've partnered with Watchtower in and around this particular business problem in this particular area. And likewise, we'll bring this together in terms of how this complements our portfolio of products and services in providing a defense in-depth approach to the cyber risks that organizations face today. And once again, just to reiterate, any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat window as we go along. But without further ado, you're not here to listen to me today. I'm going to hand over to Paul Hogan to start the session.
Thank you, Lee, and good morning, everyone. So look, I'd just like to start with, maybe we'll start with a quick poll. I mean, this webinar is about the attack surface management and the evolving attack surface is the first component. But I thought we might just ask with a quick poll. Do you really understand what attack surface management is? We just want to try and get a feel of what the audience thinks of attack surface management, what it is. Okay, we can see some of the answers coming in there now. We'll just let it settle down for a second. So what we're seeing here is probably what we've seen anecdotally in the marketplace, that there is some knowledge of what attack surface is, possibly, but what's attack surface management? Yeah, we'll still wait a couple more responses coming in. So yeah, I think what we're seeing there, people do have an idea, but not really quite sure what it is. And what we will do today in this webinar is we'll educate you on what attack surface management is, how important it is, and then ideally how you can go and mitigate it. So if I just move on, I kind of thought I'd start with this. I mean, it's interesting. Organizations have lots of controls and technologies in place to stop cyber attacks, but despite that, despite the controls, despite the technologies in place, we still see attacks happening. So you can see on the screen there, these are 3 very recent attacks. They're from this year. They're with organizations who you can expect would have a significant spend and investment in protecting themselves from threat actors and adversaries, yet still they have been subject to these attacks. So it's kind of really clear that something's not quite working right in terms of our ability to identify what's happening out there, detect and respond to those attacks. So if we very briefly take a look and see what are the attack vectors, what are the initial causes and the root causes of some of these attacks. And it's not going to, I suppose, surprise you in that what we're seeing today is very, very similar to what we've seen in the last number of years. So some of the, I suppose, root causes are things like misconfigurations. So external surfaces, maybe it's your website, maybe it's your VPN, maybe it's your firewall, your estate, how people get access into your organization, and misconfigurations. More recently, when we look at cloud computing, and this is something that we see anytime IR team get an issue, and typically something on a Friday or Saturday, and it's got to do with cloud, it's typically got to do with misconfigurations. As people have moved to cloud very, very quickly and adopted cloud computing and hybrid computing, the struggle to maintain and keep a strong cloud security posture has been very, very difficult. Then there are the old perennials about unpatched systems. It's a number of years ago you would have thought unpatched systems, yes, no, we figured out a way to deal with that, but that hasn't been the case. Unpatched systems are still a major issue, a major source of and root cause of issues that organizations are feeling. And then lastly, and there's some more data points on the screen there, but also things like 0 days and your ability that if there is a 0 day, now not a lot of organizations get targeted with that, but if there is a 0 day, if there is a vulnerability that's out there, how quick or how able are you to detect that that's out there, figure out what it is, what the impact is to your organization, and be able to respond to it. So with that in mind, we also got to think of what has the environment looked like and how has the environment transformed and changed over the years. So if you went back something like 20 years ago, cybersecurity in some ways is quite simple. You had your environment, you effectively put everything behind a perimeter, you put in some firewalling, and you were able to protect it in that way. If you looked about 10 years ago, a lot of people were talking about this dissolving perimeter. What happens when we start moving assets outside of the perimeter? So things like, let's move it to data centers, let's look at some cloud, let's look at moving applications and services elsewhere. And then today, when we look at things like business and IT transformation, the environment has changed dramatically. No longer can we just lock stuff behind a perimeter of firewall. The firewall effectively now is every individual user. Users now have access to all your corporate data, whether it's on devices, whether it's on mobile devices. In a post-COVID era, we're all working. A lot of us are working from home. So when you put in that remote working, when you put in the multi-cloud approach, you can see that the dissolving perimeter, the perimeter is no longer there. Now, what has this meant? This has meant that where in the past we're able to protect what we could see in an organization very easily, now there's a couple of issues. First of all, it's very difficult to understand exactly what you look like from externally. So what is that surface looks like? And we talk about surface, it's not just a range of IP addresses. So in the past, we would have said, look, can you do a pen test for my organization? Here's my range of IP addresses, and I think that's everything, and I'll be fine. Whereas now, when you look at the surface, it's domains, it's your domain. If you have some subsidiaries, it's their domains as well. It's identities, it's networking. Yes, it is those range of IP addresses. It's data and where the data is located. Is it in cloud? Is it on premise? Is it in data centers? It's the data that's in those set of cloud apps, whether they're custom developed apps or whether they're SaaS apps. If you're an organization that has IoT as well, that's another surface. It's your remote workers and it's your various websites. So as you can see, the surface has gone and expanded from just what we would have thought of a couple of IP addresses to something that's dramatically bigger. And the net effect of this has been, and it kind of points back to those root causes. It is for an organization, for lots of organizations, 30% of assets are either unknown or unmanaged, and that's due to this rapid transformation. So as that organization, as your organization has grown very, very quickly, and it has looked to adopt those new computing paradigms, it's now found itself in that we're not quite sure what's out there. And this kind of gets exasperated with things like shadow IT. So even though a central IT may have and are managing a large part of the estate, what we do tend to see is that through things like shadow IT, there's parts of the estate where data is exposed, where identities are exposed, where assets are exposed that people just don't know about. And how is that related to, I suppose, compromises that we've seen? So nearly 80% of organizations have been compromised by an unknown or unmanaged asset. So either the asset hasn't been identified or known to be as part of the organization, or it has been known, but hasn't been managed. So the criticality of that asset, the vulnerabilities that are associated haven't been known. As an interesting, I suppose, data point that we have talked a little bit about vulnerabilities, but there's also those misconfigurations where we talked about just a minute ago. Gartner reckoned that by 2026, your non-patchable attack surface. So when we're looking at this, it's not just about devices that are patched or unpatched, but your non-patchable attack surface, and this is mainly down configurations, will grow to about 50% of what your overall attack surface is. So you can see this is becoming a very kind of complex marketplace. The challenges then that we see, first of all, is visibility. As you can imagine, maintaining or even knowing what your attack surface is critical but hard. It's very difficult to keep a track of all of those surfaces that are out there. Even if you do understand what those surfaces are, understanding the impact of those if they happen to be compromised is very, very difficult. Traditionally, what have we done? We've looked at things as penetration, such as penetration testing and maybe vulnerability assessments. And when you look at something like a penetration test, it's kind of point in time. It's absolutely critical, absolutely important to do penetration testing, particularly in our new DevSecOps kind of world. But penetration testing is something that happens either once, twice, or a number of times a year. It's not happening constantly. And so the minute you get the test and when you do some remediations, you're out of date because the next vulnerability that might be out there, the next exposure might be out there that you haven't picked up in your penetration test. To kind of address that, we might do some vulnerability scanning. So some vulnerability scanning is a kind of low-level scan to see, what do I look like externally from what I know. And so when you're running vulnerability scanning, you're telling the scanners what my organization looks like. And as you can see, as we're building up a picture, even though these tools and technologies are important and play an important part, they seem to miss the picture. Our vulnerability scanning won't scan what it doesn't know about, so it won't discover what it doesn't know about. It'll just scan what you tell it to scan. Our penetration testing is out of date the minute we've done it. Yes, it's given us some really good and useful information. So what we do need is something that allows us to have that continuous visibility into what our surface looks like. First of all, what our assets are. Secondly, what are those vulnerabilities associated with those assets? And then rapidly, can we do something about it? And that's response. So knowing is important, but responding is more important. And so responding is if something changes. So someone updates an asset and introduces a vulnerability. Someone deploys a new asset out there, like a web service that is vulnerable. That we need to understand what that is really, really quickly. And secondly, once we understand what it is and what the issues are with it, that we're able to react to it. So reaction is, can we go and isolate that device? Can we go and patch it? Can we go and make some configuration changes? And then lastly, we need to be able to also do this in an asynchronous manner. So, we see Patch Tuesday, we see vendors coming out with exploits or mitigations. So once we get some of those advisories from some of our suppliers, it's critical that we can take those and go and search for them. So, for example, that we can do some proactive threat hunting for something that's just released to be able to do that in the environment. So with all of that in place, that's kind of what we need to do to understand what our attack surface is, how critical it is, and what we can do to respond to it. So just thought, having introduced that topic, we just ask one more question. Right now, given what we've talked about and what an attack surface is, do you think you understand what your current attack surface is and are you able to do anything about it? So do you think you understand all your assets that are out there, how vulnerable they are, and what the impact may be? Okay, I'm just watching some of those questions coming in right now. And again, this is beginning to, I suppose, resemble what we saw in the earlier question. Yeah, that even if you do understand what attack surface and attack surface management is, it's clear, and we've seen this as we've gone through exercises and discovery exercises, that organizations are struggling. They're struggling to understand what their attack surface is, and they're struggling to understand if they can map out all the entities and surfaces that are out there, if there's an issue, what that's going to mean to them. So I think we can see there that over 80% or 80, nearly 90% of organizations either don't understand what their surface is or not quite sure what it is either. And I suppose if you're not quite sure what it is, you probably don't know what it is. So that leads us on to, how do we solve this? So what we need is real-time visibility, and this is where attack surface management comes in. So real-time visibility allows us to do what? Firstly, allows us to kind of run these use cases. The very first one is that discovery exposure. So it's critical that we can do a discovery exercise, and this needs to happen continuously, where we can see what's out there, what are the known assets and unknown assets, within the environments that we know about, and also the environments that we don't know about, whether they're cloud environments or SaaS platforms or subsidiaries or some of the services that they may have. The second point there around shadow IT is kind of an extension of this. Shadow IT has been very, very difficult for organizations to manage. Yes, there are solutions that can help you to do it, but yeah, it still can be quite difficult to manage shadow IT and uncover what shadow IT is. And again, these are assets that are stood up very quickly by parts of the business to be able to do something. Typically, you're sharing data, but effectively you're opening your attack surface. So understanding what the environment looks like is very, very first thing. The second thing that we need to do is, understanding what we look like is fine, but what are the vulnerabilities and what is their exposure? And that's where we need this continuous testing. So ideally, we would do penetration testing with a team of penetration testing testers daily. That just prohibited. It can't happen. We've seen that vulnerability assessment is good, but it's not the ideal answer because it doesn't address absolutely everything. Some of these surfaces that aren't known. So it's a concept known as continuous automated red teaming. So effectively, what we're doing here, or what a solution should be able to do for you, is more than vulnerability assessment, not quite a full penetration test, but to deliver enough data and value that allows you to understand what the surface is, understand the vulnerabilities, and then go and match it and then go address it very, very quickly. And then when you address it, and anyone who's done any kind of vulnerability assessments would have seen in the past, when you discover what your vulnerabilities are, that's only the starting point. It's really key then to be able to prioritize them. So we take, as an example, a small organization with something like maybe 1,500 employees, and we've looked at their attack surface. We've seen something like maybe 2,000 different attack surfaces between domains and IPs and all the other kind of entities we talked about. And when you look at all the vulnerabilities that are associated with those, it's key then that we have to prioritize what's important. Which ones are exploitable? So we need to know if we can exploit them. So when you're testing, that's why that testing needs to be just more about the vulnerability, but also is the vulnerability exploitable. Prioritization allows us to do things like rapid response. Once we prioritize it, we can see where the key issues are. Rapid response and allows us to go and mitigate those very, very quickly. And then lastly, and this doesn't apply to absolutely everyone, but organizations that have gone through mergers and acquisitions and have subsidiaries, understanding that the risk that they pose as well, because they are like any other organization. They've lots of attack surfaces. They're now your attack surfaces. So an approach will look something like this. First of all, we need to be able to discover and monitor changes to your environment. So either new assets that are deployed, assets that have changed in terms of, they might have been rebuilt or repatched, or through a whole DevSecOps cycle, the environment has changed slightly. Understanding what the environment is, the first piece, probing it and doing penetration testing type activities. That's our continuous red team testing for weakness and vulnerabilities. Also, to be able to asynchronously hunt is kind of a key important, that if a new vulnerability comes out, as we're going through the cycle, that we can go and check for it directly and see how you're impacted. So then that allows us to do that rapid remediation, and of course, any service that we look for needs to be able to be wrapped up in a service that does that reporting, that we can see what's happening, that we can report it back to the organizations. And again, following on from that other data point that Gartner mentioned earlier, so they've also said that by 2026, that as an organization, if you can prioritize your security investments in things like continuous threat exposure management and attack surface management, that you will realize something like a 2/3 reduction in breaches. So that's a kind of a key data point there. That unless you start doing this, you will be subject to more and more, or could be subject to more and more breaches. And if you do have an ability that allows you to do this, that'll reduce that exposure by 2/3, which when you think of it, is a huge number. So with that in mind, I thought we just ask one last poll question here. So we've asked already, what attack surface management is. We've seen that. We've asked how well you were able to detect it. So right now, given what we said, you should be able to do in terms of discovery, in terms of testing, in terms of prioritization. How well positioned are you to manage your attack surface right now? We just asked this poll question. And given some of the earlier questions, I would think that we'd probably have something kind of similar. I see some of the answers coming in here now. We don't have anyone who thinks they're extremely well positioned to manage that surface. We have about half the attendees think that they're somewhat well responded. And then probably roughly another half the attendees are not in a position at all to manage that attack surface. And again, that matches what we see, I suppose, anecdotally in the marketplace. So I think with that in mind, it's probably a good time to pass over to Owen to talk a little bit about a technology and a solution that might be able to help us out with the challenges we've just seen. Owen.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, let me just take control so I can do the slides. It's really interesting to see the answers to these polls come in. Like you say, it actually does match what we see working with our customers. So yeah, my name's Owen Evans. I'm VP for Europe at Watchtower, and I'm going to be talking about who we are and how we fit into the picture that Paul's just been painting. So at Watchtower, fundamentally, we're a cyber technology company. We exist to help organizations to understand how they can be compromised today. And in line with the challenges that Paul's been discussing, we build solutions around attack surface management, continuous automated red teaming. Now, fundamentally, we're a highly skilled team. It's a technical team. We've got years of experience performing high-end red teaming engagements for large financial institutions, enterprise businesses, etc. Working through regulators, like the likes of the Bank of England's CBEST framework example, and of course through private enterprise organizations as well. So we do pride ourselves in being a team that's basically spent the whole careers, replicating the same attacks and techniques as APT groups, ransomware gangs, etc., to compromise large organizations. Now, you may have heard about us in the news recently, most recently with maybe our .mobi research or some of the vulnerability development that we've been doing. But really, we've been making a bit of a name for ourselves in the last few years for being the first to respond to new and emerging threats. We're very frequently the quickest to analyze new vulnerabilities, new attacks when they do come up in the wild. And the reason that we do that is really to constantly improve our capability and our understanding of these threats and build that capability back into our technology for the benefit of our customers and to help them to understand their exposure. So what do we do for our customers? Well, typically we start with the visibility piece like Paul was talking about. Just like he said, modern attack surfaces, they're sprawling, they're hard to keep track of. Some of it is ephemeral by design. And so our job is to find all of that stuff exposed to the internet that is associated with your organization and to help you keep track of all of the different targets that you're painting to a would-be attacker. So just like an attacker, our job really is to build visibility of your attack surface so you can understand how you're presenting yourself to the outside world. Our adversary site engine identifies assets across all of the different types of assets that we see attackers using and leveraging to breach organizations. And that encompasses everything from websites to cloud assets, SaaS platforms, etc. Our first job here is to map out all of these different types of assets that might be targeted and then monitor them for change. And that last bit here really is the key thing for me, I think. It's not just about finding the assets to bring them into scope for testing. It's about truly monitoring them all the time, understanding how they evolve over time, and then contextualizing that with relevance to your organization and your security strategy. The next step then is to answer that question, the really key one, how could you actually be compromised today? Or, an attacker looking at your business, how would they target you? How would they look to compromise you? Now, we answer that question using our continuous assurance engine, and it's essentially our automated red team. It takes all of those assets that we just spoke about and it continuously tests them, looking for ways to target your business, compromise your organization, looking for attack paths that it could potentially leverage against you in exactly the same way that a real attacker or an APT group would. Now, it does this across a very broad spectrum of all the different types of attacks and techniques that we see being used to compromise businesses. So that might be through compromised subsidiaries or suppliers somewhere down the chain. It could be, those vulnerabilities with, exploit code that's easily exploitable and we see going around in the news. And then it might be things like exposed secrets that could be used to log into your environment. And critically, not all of these vulnerabilities, things like exposed credentials, they're not necessarily going to be owned by your organization. Attackers really don't care about that. It's just about whether they can take something and use it and leverage it against your organization. So maybe you have a developer that's exposed a set of credentials in a personal GitHub repository, for example. If an attacker can take them, use them and leverage them against you, they will do, and so will we. So we discover all of these vulnerabilities, and most crucially, we validate them to ensure that everything raised is an actual risk to your organization right now, and it's worth spending your time to fix it. So the last piece of the problem then is with dealing with those constant new and emerging threats that we spoke about. And no matter how good of a handle you have on your perimeter, on your assurance program, etc., things are always going to happen which are outside of your control. Even when you've got everything else kind of locked down, new vulnerabilities are going to come out. They hit the news cycles, and typically, we panic. We have to drop everything and figure out how they impact us. We have questions that need answering. Now, we do this and we help answer those questions with our proactive hunting capability, which is how we translate that threat intelligence, what's happening in the world and in the wild, into answers to those questions. So when those events happen, when new vulnerabilities come out, new attack techniques come out, it's part of our responsibility to understand those threats and the new vulnerability maybe, or the attack technique, to build a capability around it and then proactively hunt for those threats for all of our clients so that we can say, you are affected, here is where and here is what you need to do about it. Or often more critically, the inverse. You're not affected, we've checked your perimeter, you don't need to worry about it. And the result here is that with our proactive hunting, we can translate that threat intelligence into answers to your questions so that instead of knee-jerk reactions, we can handle it for you. And so that you and Echo can focus on the bigger picture of the security assurance program, things that really matter. So overall, as I said, we've built our technology to help our customers to understand their attack surfaces, how they're presenting themselves to the outside world, finding all those different targets that you're painting for a would-be attacker. Our job then is to constantly discover vulnerabilities and validate them so that you know exactly what matters, and ultimately put you in a position where you can always answer that question: how can we be compromised today, and what do we need to do right now to prevent a potential breach from happening? So I think at this point, I think I can pass it back to Echo to talk about maybe how that fits into the wider portfolio.
Thank you, Owen. That's brilliant. That really I suppose gives an idea of a solution. What I thought I might just do now is see where this fits in, as you said, to the overall, I suppose, portfolio of services. And within Echo, this will be our set of services. This is kind of our approach. It maps into typical frameworks like NIST and ISO set of controls. But just to explain in a second where it is and where attack surface management fits in. So we go through this predict, prevent, detect, and respond approach. So on the extreme left-hand side is a predict set of kind of features, and ideally that's what you want to do. You want to start with something where you can predict or predict an incident or an issue that may happen, and that allows you then to mitigate it before you go further along the right-hand side. So predict is on the left, knowing what your attack surface is. Prevent is in the middle and protecting you, and then detect and respond is along the right hand side, and recover from incidents. So ideally, what we want to be doing is predicting the attack surface and preventing issues as a result of what we find there, and that's where we see attack surface management fitting in at that point in the life cycle. So as you can see, that's where it fits in. How do we take that product, the Watchtower product, and build it into a service? Because products are great, but sometimes you need that service wrap around as well. So our service looks a little something like this. So we use Watchtower for a number of different components. First, on the extreme left-hand side there, you can see some of the engines within Watchtower allows us to do this asset discovery. So it's doing that continuous real-time attack surface discovery of all those assets and asset types and classifications that we talked about earlier. Once it discovers those assets, and that's continually discovering and updating them. So an asset may not need something one day, but may mean something totally different the next day. And how do we understand that? We do that through our testing. So the Watchtower platform does what we said was really key a couple of minutes ago. This continuous automated and red team testing. So it is not just discovering vulnerabilities, but it's also trying to exploit those vulnerabilities and then presenting that information back to us. So that's really key and interesting. So exploitable vulnerabilities are much more important to us than non-exploitable vulnerabilities, because as we look to prioritize what we do, that's the feed into it. So let's take it. The platform is running. It's done asset discovery. It's done some testing. It's found an exploited vulnerability. It's exploited that. What we do is we take from Watchtower into our SOAR platform and create an incident, and then that incident allows us to manage the ongoing remediation. So the incident goes into our SOC, and then our SOC use it either to go and talk with the client to try and remediate it, or we can use some SOAR action playbooks within our SOC to try and mitigate what that happens to be. So it could be something simple like maybe it's an asset that needs to be removed and we have an EDR platform that we can remove it. It can be something like a network that we need to lock down, or a set of IP addresses. And so as a result of that issue that we've seen, we can automatically go and remediate that issue. And then the last piece, which you can see on the bottom there, is this kind of out of band or this threat hunting. So for some of those newly discovered vulnerabilities, and even though these engines are running behind the scenes, kind of real time and continuously, we do have the ability with Watchtower, if there's a newly discovered vulnerability, say with a firewall platform or a CASB platform, or whatever it happens to be, that we can do some threat hunting straight away and see how does this impact an environment. And it's funny, when we've seen in the past issues like with firewalls and people saying to us, does this affect me? That's been very difficult for us to do. So first of all, we said, well, does it affect you? What kind of firewall versions do you have? Is it exploitable on that version or this version? Whereas this allows us to do this really, really quickly. We already know what your attack surface is. We feed in this threat hunt around this particular vulnerability, and straight away it'll come back and tell us, yes, you have this brand of firewall, it's on this version, this vulnerability is associated with that. So again, we'll go and create that incident in our SOAR platform, and then from there we go and really run some actions to go and mitigate it. Sometimes those actions are automated, and sometimes those actions are something that take a little bit more manual configuration to do. Say it's a cloud misconfiguration, that's something that would need a configuration change rather than an automated action. So that is attack surface management. That's where it fits into our service. I thought at this stage I might just turn it back to Lee and see, do we've any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So we've not got any questions come through in the chat window, but we did have some questions from one of the clients submitted in advance. So just before we cover those questions, if there's anything that Paul, Owen have covered today that's not clear, please feel free to put that in the chat window. We'll come to those. But to start with, I'm going to open up. We've got 4 questions. First one, I'm going to open this up to yourself, Paul. You can probably take this question. So the question that's come in: can you share a real-world example or case study where attack surface management has significantly reduced the risk of a cyber attack to an organization?
Yeah, it can, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to predict the future. So when you say reduce the risk, but there's one example where we did a proof of value. We're only in the proof of value stage with Watchtower, and there was an organization that had a web asset, an asset that was used to collect data from clients, not its website, a separate web asset. What Watchtower was able to find was there was an admin panel associated with that web asset, which is fine. That was exposed to the internet. That's not best practices, but that's okay. We can understand too. But it was also able to see that there's a default username and password that comes with that web app control panel, and it was able to test that, discover that, and report it back to us. So yes, the vulnerability was there, and that web panel was exposed. But the power of the platform to say, here's a panel that's exposed, I found this. I've also tested against a known set of default usernames and passwords for this particular technology. And in this case, we're able to get into it. So yeah, what would have happened if threat actors again access? Well, it's difficult to know as you play through that scenario. But I think in that very, very simple example, it shows how the platform and the service can very, very rapidly detect an issue and then allow us to respond to it.
Excellent. Just want to ask, follow on a question there. When we talk, you spoke heavily, Paul, I know, around testing, and obviously you've used this terminology around sort of red teaming. In terms of, can you just expand upon that in terms of, in terms of the testing you do and sort of testing in a good sense, probably, Owen, rather than from an attacker perspective?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so when we're talking about continuous automated red teaming, our job is to find all those initial entry points as soon as possible, right? So we want to look at your entire attack surface in its completeness, and then look for every single possible way in to get an initial foothold in your perimeter. And then our job really is to get that information to you as quickly as possible so you can plug that gap. So our job is to find those potential findings and then validate that they can be exploited. So we do that with what we call impactless payloads, which is how we test that something can be exploitable in its current configuration without actually causing any impact to the underlying system. So what we don't want to do, obviously, is flood people with lists of vulnerabilities that are maybe theoretical or can't actually be exploited. But by validating that first, we can say, okay, we found this particular finding, and it might be, like Paul says, a set of default credentials. It might be a more advanced exploit. But we then validated that it can actually be used to gain access to that system, and then it's worth spending your time to fix.
Excellent, perfect. Thank you, Owen. We're probably going to throw the next question at you, Owen.
Okay.
So the question is asking around advancements, sort of very much in a buzzword around AI and artificial intelligence, and you spoke heavily today around the automated testing. How's that sort of the use of AI and automated testing transformed organizational processes and decision making? And particularly, how do you feel that what future trends would you predict as I say, as the evolution of AI continues to become sort of embedded in products and service offerings in the future?
Sure. So first of all, I think in terms of future trends, the biggest one you can expect to see is the letters AI next to probably everyday's products. Which is typically what we see in this case. To be honest, for me, I think the mass adoption of AI, it's a rapid accelerator for tech advancement, right? And so it's making big waves, not just in ASM exclusively, but it's clearly making a big impact across all of cyber. It's going to be changing the way that we're working. And in terms of the development speeds and the way that we're able to push technology forward, it's a massive accelerator. Personally, I would caution against, obviously, the bandwagon side of things. I don't think we should be trying to force AI into products that doesn't necessarily get a benefit from it. But certainly I do think there's a lot of great use cases for AI and language models in areas like finding prioritization, in vulnerability management and risk management, etc. And so I do think we're going to see a lot of unique features and unique capabilities coming to the forefront over the next few years or so. So yeah, I think it's really exciting. But for me, it's probably more of a commentary on the impact of AI in cyber as a whole, as opposed to specifically to ASM, because I think it's a bigger thing than just that.
Absolutely, thank you, Owen. Paul, I'm going to throw this question at you. In terms of, obviously, we've seen lots of regulatory change and lots of noise recently around sort of DORA and NIS2. How do you see the evolving sort of compliance requirements influencing the development and adoption of ASM technologies, etc., in the coming years?
Yeah, that's a good question, Lee. I like probably start off by saying, but looking at things like ASM, compliance drivers are important, but they shouldn't be the major driver. I think the major driver is that your approach and an organization's approach to cybersecurity in terms of best practices. Compliance drivers are important though, because if there are regulatory drivers that you need to be in tune with, you got to adopt them. And what you'll see in some of these compliance drivers, sometimes they are going to call out ASM specifically, and particularly things like the NIS and say the US cybersecurity maturity models certifications. So you will see things like ASM being called out directly. Also called out indirectly in terms of things like being able to manage third parties, understanding the risk that third parties may apply to you, but just in overall, ensuring that you have that comprehensive cybersecurity approach, ASM and the tooling is well defined within some of those compliance drivers.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. And last question to wrap up. We're coming up to quarter to the hour. if I'm one of the customers, etc., listening to this session, this webinar today, we've covered a lot in terms of content, in terms of introducing what tax service management is, the threat and vulnerability landscape, and how that feeds into a defence in-depth approach. What's the one takeaway, Paul? For one of our customers in terms of listening to this, what's one takeaway? When they go back to their day job following this session. Same question to you, Owen.
Yeah. I think the takeaway is first of all understanding what attack surface management is, understanding what your attack surface looks like, understanding have you the ability to react and respond to it right now, and if not, what can you do about it? I think that's a key piece. Hopefully we've educated people into what attack surface management is, and now it's just take it away and see what is your position, your posture in relation to it.
Yeah, I think I really heavily agree with what you said, Paul. The thing I tend to talk to people about is encouraging them to think forward about security strategies and assurance programs, and not kind of get bogged down in the traditional approaches like annual pen testing, etc. We've been doing those for a long time now, and there are better ways to do things. So I think it's all about forward thinking, understanding where your gaps are, and thinking proactively about how you can address those, whether that's visibility, whether that's how quickly you can respond to new threats, being pragmatic about how you manage your security, forward thinking, and willing to try new things. I think is the message that I would push with everybody that I speak to.
Perfect. Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Paul. Great answers. And that comes to the end of today's webinar. I would thank everyone for joining us. Thank you for questions that come in advance. Just to check there's no more in the Q&A window. Nope, it's all good. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Hopefully today was insightful. And thank you for summarising in terms of some of the key takeaways and some of the key points. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lee and Paul.